To play with things a while before my habits. Savior of the
No one dies in the palace without a command from the Emperor.
dreaming? I'd like to think so. Pathetic earthling.
Remove the earth, woman.
Forget it, Payne.
This is a public announcement. The earthling Flash Gordon is to be executed at 29:15 Mjolnir time.
Don't kill him yet, Father. I want him.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Mjolnir at the movies. It's been a while, but Mjolnir's alive, and I have a new co-host with me, and her name is Mimi. Hello to you, Mimi.
Hello from down under. How are you tonight?
Excellent, and yes, hello from down under. That could be a sexual innuendo. That's great because this film is full of them. So
They are. Goodness gracious, we started off well.
Yes. So, yes, we're looking at Flash Gordon. I think that the theme tune gave it away just there. I might have given it away a bit. Because, of course, that's probably one of the most famous theme tunes in cinema history. Probably more famous in Britain than in America. But I don't know about Australia. Was this big in Australia? I don't know. You might be a bit too young, but is Flash Gordon and Queen and all that big over there?
I've never actually heard of Flash Gordon. I'm quite of a novice when it comes to science fiction, but I know about Queen, and I knew that Queen did the soundtrack to this film, but I'm not sure about Flash Gordon. I don't think so.
Yeah, it's very odd because Flash Gordon, of course, is an American cartoon originally created by Alex Raymond. It is very American, but the film is very British in many ways. So it's a bit of an odd one, and this probably accounts for the fact that it didn't do so well in North America at the box office, but it did do very well in Britain and in various European countries as well, because, of course, there's a huge Italian element to it as well. Of course, it's produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who's one of the big producers at that time, produces Dune later, very famously, of course, or rather his daughter Raffaella did, but he was the sort of big executive behind it. We'll probably get on to that when we do Dune, so I don't want to get too much into that. But, yeah, what about the style of the film itself? Would you describe it as particularly British or a blend of British and American or European? How would you describe it exactly?
I would say based upon the characters and the accents in the film, I would say that it's very much British, but I would also say that it does have that American aspect to it. With certain things definitely, and the cinema and the references in the cinema as well, I would definitely correlate that to be a bit more American. But I think the hero, Flash Gordon himself, fashions himself more as a British archetype of a Superman as well. It's obviously, DC Comics and such things, but I would say that's more of a blend of both things, you know, the British and the American. And I think they do complement each other in this film.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially if you look at Flash Gordon, the character, and how it was created. There does seem to be very much a European sensibility in his creation. He's very much an aristocratic character. He's a polo player in the original comic book, whereas here, of course, he's been made into an American football star. So you've got two things happening there. One, he's becoming sort of lower culture because polo is regarded as a more aristocratic game, more upper class game, and also more a European game rather than an American game because, Americans, would they even know what polo's all about? If you ask them, they'd probably think that it was played in water. But
They'd be like, what grass? What grass?
yes. That's, what, on horses? What are you talking about? But yeah, this is very much a sort of a pastime of the British aristocracy. It's also big in Argentina, actually. But yeah, they've changed that around. So he was sort of more an American in the Anglo sense of American when the comic book came out in the 1930s. Comic strip, I should say, rather than comic book. And equally the serial that was made after. Now, I watched the serial, actually, as a boy. Not when it first came out, I hasten to add. But I used to watch all those kind of film, those old serials, just like George Lucas did later on as well. Not that I'm younger than George Lucas, by the way. But
Didn't George Lucas want to produce this film himself? But something happened. There was a complication, and then he went to go and write Star Wars. I believe that he actually wanted to create this film, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. He wanted to do it, and he was turned down, and that led him to create Star Wars, which was very much based on Flash Gordon and on Buck Rogers as well. Buck Rogers precedes Flash Gordon, actually, in terms of its creation as a comic character, and I believe as a serial as well. If I remember rightly, Buster Crabbe played both Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, but don't quote me on that. But I think I'm right in saying that. I certainly remember his cameo on the 1980s version of Buck Rogers, where there's a lovely bit of meta sort of banter between the new Buck Rogers, Gil Gerard, and the old one in Buster Crabbe, where, because of course he's frozen in time, he's suspended in animation, and he goes into the future and everything, and there's one of the older pilots there, and Gil Gerard, who's the new Buck Rogers, says to him, "That's good shooting, old man. Where did you learn that?" He said, "Oh, I was doing this long before you were born, son." And he said, "Oh, I doubt that." He said, "Oh, believe me, son," because of course he was the old Buck Rogers. There's a lovely bit of meta narrative there. But coming back to this, yeah, I used to also watch Crash Corrigan as well. What is it called now? Undersea Kingdom, those kind of serials. And so, when this came out, this came out in my lifetime when I was a little kid, so this really sort of went, wow, and we're great, a new film of Flash Gordon, this is fantastic. And of course there were a lot of British stars in there, who I knew already from television and so on. So yeah, it's as I say, it is a sort of blend of English and American, especially as the lead character, the lead actor, I should say, was an American football player, Sam Jones. He played American football in was in Marine, I believe it was. And then he went on to play for a sort of the B team of, was it the Seattle Seahawks or something? And he went and he played for their B team. So so he does actually have a background in American football. So probably also adapted it to the character. It was interesting.
Yeah,
Go on,
and I feel like in an American sense, that definitely makes him heroic and adheres to the American consciousness in a way of he's like a football player, and there's certain scenes where he's literally playing, American football. And yeah, so in that aspect, it's definitely very American when he's throwing the football and the scientist comes in and ends up knocking him out. It's really a great film. It's very comedic in certain senses. But yeah, American as well in its adaptation.
Yeah, well, it's often described as quite camp, and in that, I suppose, it's based on the British theatrical tradition in many ways. You've got a lot of British theatre actors there. I would sort of describe it as pantomime in space in many ways. you do have some of these actors who did appear in pantomime, Richard O'Brien and so. Richard O'Brien is very famous for the Rocky Horror Show, of course, the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the Rocky Horror Show. And Brian Blessed, also a big theatre actor, as was Timothy Dalton, later more famous for James Bond. But certainly at that time you got a lot of sort of theatrical actors, and this is very theatrical. It's not realistic at all. It has that element of it being all very staged, and certainly there is, as I say, a camp element to it, but not in the negative sense of, say, a Joel Schumacher film, Joel Schumacher's Batman or something, but more in the original Batman series. And in fact, that was taken as a sort of an inspiration in many ways. But equally, I see a lot of sort of inspirations like Barbarella, for example. Barbarella was also produced by Dino De Laurentiis. It's funny, actually. I was looking at that today, and I thought that it was Brigitte Bardot who starred in that. It wasn't at all. It was Jane Fonda. I don't know why I thought, but anyway, I'm sort of getting off the subject here. What do you think about this sort of theatricality, this sort of very artificial sense to the film?
Well, I think it fits in very well. I feel like the people who are witnessing this within the context, when it first came out, I'd find that they would have seen it as quite a very good comic book and would have found that Flash Gordon is an archetype of sorts. And yeah, I actually think that it was a really great picture. But, when the film carries on and you see certain symbiologies, that's what I was really taken aback by. You have, I forget it right now, but the main leader, the Hail of whatever, and the Freemason symbol that's there. I think that that's so interesting, and how they're abducted by this mad scientist and the flashbacks, during the film that this mad scientist has. But I thought it was a very well done film. Definitely.
Yeah, it is. It's a very well done film, but there is certain propagandist elements in it, isn't there? As you've touched upon. Shall we get along with? Shall we come on to those now and get it out of the way?
We might as well. Yeah.
Do you want to start, or shall I?
Well, you obviously have, when they're abducted by the mad scientist, what's his name? Hans. Oh, no. They're abducted onto the planet of Hans Zarkov, and, they enter this show where everybody's trying to adhere to this leader of a foreign land, right? And then they all come out in their uniforms and they have this Freemason symbol, and a lot of them have that 6-pointed star that I thought was very interesting. And I was kind of like, what's going on here? What's the reason for this? But it's obviously a Hollywood production. But as I said before, this was really my first introduction to sci-fi, so I didn't really know what to expect. But when I saw these symbiologies, I was quite taken aback because I was like, oh, well, what is this and what is that and certain things. But yeah, what do you reckon?
Yes, it is very interesting, particularly as that was done quite deliberately, because in the original, I say the original serial, it was an octagram rather than a hexagram. So they've changed that quite consciously. So there is something going on there.
That's interesting, isn't it?
That's right. And the whole thing, and equally, Hans Zarkov is never Jewish until this point. This whole sort of history, which you see when they're erasing his memory, is completely invented for the film. And so you sort of have this, the Jew as the scientist, the Jew as the conscience of humanity, imprinted on this film.
Yeah, right.
Because he's always the one who's pointing to, this is humanity, and so on. He's sort of the moral force of the film, even though he, at the beginning is trying to get people on board his spaceship at gunpoint. but that's
yeah, he literally abducted them. He was like, "Oh, just go and breach the telephone and come to the spaceship, right?" Because he didn't want to be alone in his own odyssey. He wanted to have some people there to accompany him, which is very interesting as well. And I thought that memory scene with Zirkov was very interesting because it moved quite fast, so I had to dumb it down a little bit. I had to take it into like a lower speed. And I'm sure that you caught on, but that little flashing memory that Zirkov had, when his memory was being eradicated, but then simultaneously afterwards, his memory was not eradicated at all, and it like came back to him. And it's funny when, him and, who was it? I think it was Dale. Him and Dale are escaping the high mister, right? And they're flying upon, and Dale asks him, "Well, how did you keep your memory?" And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I read a bit of Shakespeare and I remembered Shakespeare, and then I remembered the Talmud, and then I remembered all of this shit." So it's really weird also, but I'm sure that you can reference like that memory scene where he's flicking through his memories. And as I was saying, I did like I slowed it down and I picked apart all of those memories that he had. And I thought that it was quite strange. Did you do the same? Because I feel like that's quite, predictive programming in a way. It also makes it American.
Did he say, "I remember the Talmud"? I didn't get that. I know he said, "I remembered Shakespeare," and also
he said
various
he
formulas
remembered,
and so on. But I can't remember him saying, "I remember the Talmud."
He did. From the version of the film that I watched, he said after escaping with Dale, he read Shakespeare, he was referencing Einstein, and he referenced the Talmud.
Right.
So I was like,
I missed that one.
What the fuck?
I missed that one.
Yeah, I was just like, that's so strange. Yeah. I was like, what's that reference there? Why is it the Talmud? I would think that a wider audience would more adhere to the Torah or something like that. But I found that the Talmud reference was so strange, really. It was like, what's this guy doing reciting verses of the Talmud? But I suppose, if he is a Jewish doctor, I wasn't sure as to what he was. I would have thought that he was, this is in regards to Zirkov, if he was because just due to the flashbacks that he had, I would have thought that he was a Nazi doctor working on behalf of somebody else in certain senses, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Well, obviously you get in the flashbacks of the memories that they're trying to erase, you get all the sort of Holocaust imagery and everything, and you get Clytus remarking about Hitler that he showed promise. Showing the old anti-fascist credentials. What's interesting is that none of the people who created this film are Jewish, apart from the actor himself, Topol as it is. But nobody who, none of the script writers, producers, or whatever were Jewish, and yet there seems to be an awful lot of philo-Semitism in it. But that's essentially where we've got to. I mean, even in 1980, when this is created, that's where we're at. One thing that struck me, which was odd, and I don't know if you sort of looked into it or anything, but the owl image that kept coming up at that point, what was all that about? Did you?
Definitely. I actually did a contrast between all of the figures that were shown in Zherkov's memory. So the first one was Stalin, that's depicted as an ape or a monkey. And then you have Khrushchev, who's depicted as a cat. And then you have Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt at the Atlantic Conference in 1941, depicted as two lizards. And then you have Winston Churchill himself depicted as a lion. And then you have Eisenhower depicted as a monkey/chimp. And then you have Einstein depicted as a chimp or a monkey. And then you have men wearing a gas mask. And then this was the thing. It switched not to another depiction of an animal, but the men wearing a gas mask switched to Hitler at Arthur Swear's inquart, right? And then it says, in the film, now he shows promise, right? And then it switches back to the doctor's memories, and it switches to Hitler making a speech, followed by an eagle or a chicken, right? This is what I got from it. And then you have Hitler's photo, like that archetypal photo of Hitler looking to, the distance. And then you have the gas masks again, and then you have an owl, and then you have Mussolini showing up out of nowhere as an owl again. And then the World War II footage, and then it drags on to what I thought was the bombing of Dresden. And I thought that these adding on to the film for sake of maybe what the director thought was context was actually really quite irrelevant, and I found was just quite predictive programming that the audience might not see that sort of epileptic fit in a way. Because you have to slow it down to see these things. But I thought all of that stuff is very fucking interesting.
Yeah, it is very much. I mean, it's something that's called subliminal imaging, where they put in very, very fast images that you can't really register with the conscious mind, but it certainly goes into the unconscious mind. And so it bypasses and goes deep where it has an effect and you don't even know it has an effect. In the 1970s, they banned subliminal imaging because they did an experiment. They put in a subliminal cut into a film of a particular drink or something like that, and of course, in those days, they had a half-time point in the cinema, in the film, where you had the ushers coming around with drinks and so on, and there were two choices of drink, and of course everybody went to the one that they'd had the subliminal cut imprinted into their brains, to go and buy it, and so the overwhelming majority went and bought the drink or whatever it was that was advertised. So those were banned, but yet it comes into this film as a sort of, it's a clever way to get it in, really, I suppose, without
it was
realizing.
almost like it was just a propaganda tool. It was like, what are they showing all of these leaders for and all of these quite provocative images for as subliminal messaging? It's not really to sell a drink. Like, what are they selling here? So that's quite strange, eh?
Well, one of the interesting things about it, because you notice the gas mask imagery, and it occurs to me that a lot of the sort of stormtroopers, as they are, have this sort of red gas mask suit thing. They're dressed in that red robe. That
they
sort
are,
of gas mask.
and they're quite robotic as well. Like when anybody goes to stab them, they have this like technological malfunction and they just like die. So that's weird as well. And also the characters as well, like the all of the different sort of that square person, the midget person that you have, and then the other demographic of the birds flying and these different places in society as well within the film are interesting.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, with the sort of stormtroopers, I mean, they're comparable, of course, with the stormtroopers in Star Wars and things like that, where they're sort of expendable and really crap, and they're just there for the heroes to kill off. And of course, them being technological rather than biological, no one cares about them. You know, that's the sort of easy way of getting out of them being dehumanized, I suppose. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of symbolism that Ming's minions and so on, they are basically the new fascists. And as Ming is basically based on the sort of Cold War Far East, in other words, China and its satellites, they're the sort of new Nazis, the new enemy, and so on. So there is that sort of Cold War propaganda element to it. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, and I also see the symbology of a lot of the female characters having Russian accents or something that could be considered a bit foreign to a classic American accent or a classic British accent. A lot of the women that are played in this film have Russian accents, and they're also very seductive as well, which also does play along with maybe a bit of the Cold War sort of rhetoric. I thought that was interesting as well. There's a lot of things in the film where you're just like, what's that doing there? And why? And, it's weird.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's General Carla, isn't it? Who's actually played by an Italian actress, who provides the sort of the Soviet element, if you like, of this new Cold War enemy. So Ming the Merciless, who represents, the Chinese element, and then you've got General Kala, who's the Soviet element, and I mean this is not really anything new. Actually, it's quite true to the comic book, because Ming the Merciless, he represents the Yellow Peril right from his inception. He's another sort of Fu Manchu figure. This sort of beast from the east, this yellow menace, who's coming to undermine your women and so on, and there's all that to it. He's there, of course, forcibly taking Dale Arden and so on. So there's all those elements to it. And, Max von Sydow apparently found it very difficult to know what to do with the character, and it was Brian Blessed, who plays Prince Voltan, who came up with the idea. He said, look, you have to be seductive and you're a wizard at the same time, basically. He says you're playing a wizard who has the power of sexuality at his control, through magic and so on. He said, so you want to be sort of, moving seductively and lots of arm movements and so on. So, and Brian Blessed, apparently, he really sort of had a big influence on the acting in the, in the milieu of the cast. Because he's very sort of outgoing, and he is very much like Voltan in real life. In fact, he actually campaigned to to get the part of Voltan, but many of them were, they sort of auditioned for it and everything, or they were approached or whatever. He campaigned and said, I want that part, So.
Yeah, as well, and it's interesting because I think Sam Jones was under a bit of controversy And that was why the change came about the film, because I think when the film actually did come out originally, it didn't have as much of a review as it was predicted to. So then the change of the film came when it sort of propagated more of about Ming and certain things because of Sam Jones's own personal sort of things with the producers and stuff like that. And I also, isn't the voice that Flash Gordon does by Sam Jones, isn't that a deep fake in a certain sense? Like, it's not actually his original voice?
That's right. He was basically forced off the set halfway through the film because of his own actions. And he sort of, he says, yeah, it was my fault, basically. I listened to my agents and I shouldn't have done. His agents were basically trying to get him more clout and more money on the film, and eventually, Dino De Laurentiis said he'd had enough of him, and so they got rid of him, and then they put in, and they don't remember who it is to this day. The director said that it was a Canadian voice actor who they got in to finish the film off, basically. So this is Mike Hodges, who directed the film. He's probably the most famous for a film called Get Carter, which was his first film, and especially in Britain. This is a gangster film with Michael Caine. He said that basically we had to do the voiceover later, because, of course, Sam Jones had been fired. But as he admits himself, it was purely his own fault. And his career never recovered, actually. And probably because if you look at the acting, it's not great. But that's probably not his fault. It's probably because he's been dubbed over. And so it looks very artificial. But certainly Sam Jones did actually do some really good work on the film itself. That whole thing where the fight at the beginning turns into a sort of an American football kind of
yeah, right.
antics. That was his idea. It gave it a certain comedic element, a certain campness. It's more
kind like Stavislavski, becoming the part and certain things in active methods.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of these actors sort of they fell into place very nicely. As I say, I've mentioned Blessed with Prince Voltan, who is obviously that is obviously taken from Votan. It's they're basically space Vikings with wings. So there's the idea of the Valkyrie and so on, and the old kind of Norse idea. Of course, the Aesir, they come from the air and all that. They're gods of air. And equally, you have Timothy Dalton as Prince Barin. He has great gravitas. He has that sort of regal aspect to him, and that whole thing as well. The Arborea is basically Sherwood Forest, and they're Robin Hood and his merry men. That is quite obvious as well. So there's a lot of myth being reused and put into outer space here. And as I say, this is not just the film. This is the source where it comes from, which is the comic. So that's already. This is very faithful, actually, to the comic.
Yeah, right. Well, I really wouldn't know about that, but this is actually, as I said before, this is the first introduction that I've had to science fiction and stuff like that. I never really got into comics as a kid. I actually thought it was too flashy for me, so I was like, I won't get into it, right? But, having known Flash Gordon, now, I might just have to go into these things, especially because of maybe the hidden innuendos that are quite prominent in the film and other films that I think in science fiction as well. I'll definitely have to get more into maybe the comic side of things, and also the division between Marvel and DC as well, because I know that a lot of the Marvel comics kind of, in a way, they outshine DC comics, and then when you get into Stan Lee and certain things as well, but I can't really make a testament to that just based upon the fact that I haven't really done that much science fiction knowledge, but Flash Gordon is a good place to start, isn't it?
Yeah, very much. Although, I mean, for me, this is more fantasy than science fiction. It's like when you look at Star Wars, it's far more to do with fantasy than it is to do with science fiction, because there's no attempt at realism. With science fiction, there's always that sort of attempt at, at creating some kind of realism that you could sort of believe it. Whereas with these space operas, you sort of really have to suspend belief. It's like reading Tolkien or something like that. You know that this, never happened. But yet you want to believe it anyway. So that's the best sort of fantasy. And this is that kind of thing. It's set in space, but it's far more fantasy than it is science fiction, I think.
Yeah, it also has a very real aspect to it when it comes from, Earth as well, and they crash landed, and then they ended up in Zirkov space, and then they go off, and it has a very humanistic element to it as well. When who was it again? When you have Ming saying to Dale, when Dale cries because Gordon is dying essentially in a gas chamber, and she ends up, crying, and Ming says to one of the colleagues and is like, "Oh, that's something that Earth people do. They have tears and water flowing from their eyes." So it definitely has more of like a humanistic aspect to it, in contrast to Star Wars.
Well, I don't know if it's more human than Star Wars. I mean, you have the original Star Wars film, yes. I think that you're right, because you don't have a real relationship between Luke and Leia, which is rather fortunate, actually, being as they were revealed to be brother and sister, not just brother and sister, but twins.
Brothers and sisters for life, come on. It never ends.
But you do sort of get a more of a relationship with Han Solo and Leia in the later ones of the trilogy. But yeah, there's far more sort of sexual innuendo and everything in this film. That is a fact. It's far more sexualized, but only in a way that adults would understand. So there's, for kids, it's a bit of fun. It's pantomime and all that kind of stuff. For adults, there's adult themes going on over their heads, which is the thing.
Was that
pantomime anyway?
Yeah, was that controversial in any sort of respect to Flash Gordon and the time that it was brought out?
I think that it would have been more controversial in America than it would in Britain. Now, that's a very strange thing to say, but because there's this idea of, no sex, please, we're British. But that's never really been true, actually. America has always been far more puritanical. There was an enormous controversy when the original Flash Gordon was brought out with the Hawkmen, because they thought that they resembled angels, and this was blasphemous. This is how retarded the Jesus cooks are, But but yeah, also the sexual aspect. In Britain we would think nothing of it. In Italy, certainly not. Which of course, as I say, you have a huge Italian element to it, particularly as one of the main sort of sexualized fantasy women is Italian herself, what is she called, Ornella Muti or something, and a very attractive woman, it has to be said. It's not a real name anyway, Ornella Muti. It's some kind of more complex Italian name. Francesca Rivelli. That's a real name. I don't know why she changed it, but anyway. But yeah, there is especially when you get that pillow fight, which is
oh yeah.
at one sort of level, it is quite ridiculous because they're meant to really hate each other, and yet they're fighting each other with pillows. On the other, it's sort of the male teenager's dream of having two scantily clad women attacking each other with pillows. It's got that.
Everyone's dream. But I think it's interesting as well how they put, foreign women as these seductors to these, homegrown men. I thought that was interesting as well. Like, why not have the seductress be put as a British woman or something like that, or an American woman? What's this alluding to of it being a foreign woman and this seductive character that they have that's depicted in the film as well? Like, what's that alluding to as well? What do you think?
Well, it's exactly the same thing as with Ming, isn't it? It's this danger of the sexually predatory other. So it's it plays on that because of course Muti is playing Ming's daughter, and so she is an alien ultimately, and so she is equally sort of semi-oriental as well, and so it plays into all that aspect of the threat of miscegenation and so on. But Flash is always sort of loyal to Dale Arden, even though he's only just met her. For the purposes of the film, he's only just met her, but obviously in a serial you can draw out the relationship longer. In a film you can't. And so they have to sort of fall for each other instantaneously. As she's the only Earth woman around, I suppose it's a no-brainer. It has to be her. But there is this outside sexuality.
Yeah, and Flash also has this patriotic sense towards Dale where he almost feels obligated to save this woman that he never met, as well as Zirkov. But maybe that's part of it when you move to such a foreign place, whether or not you got abducted in a spaceship, you're still going to choose the people that you ended up with, regardless of what happens, in a way.
Yeah, that's right. And in the end, the natural order of things is restored. In other words, Dale and Flash are together, and Princess Aura ends up with Prince Barin. And so you have that sort of, everything is back in its place, and all the threats of, being squashed and everything, and all they have to do now is to get back to Earth. It's interesting, actually, the ending is very much theatre-like, it's pantomime-like, where all the characters sort of stand in a line and take a bow. And that's basically what this film is.
Yeah, the ending actually made me feel quite hopeful. I was like, maybe if everybody just joined forces, we could ride off into the sunset. But it's also very fictional as well. But they did have that same obligation and that same sense of injustice that they all felt towards Ming, which essentially aligned all of the characters once they got past all of their, ingoing injustices that they all faced on behest of Ming, but at the end of the film they all came together to defeat the Empire. And that's a common theme when you find all of these heroic films, when they put upon a Superman and they make Superman the focus. You know, it's all about overthrowing a corrupt government and stuff like that. But I found the end was quite hopeful, you know, and the coming together aspect of it as well, but also quite, you know, typical of these films and following a common thread. But the flow of the film, I think the flow of the film was actually really quite well done. It had a great character formation with Flash Gordon and all of the other characters as well. It kept me very entertained as well. But yeah, it was really good, but I was quite concerned with all of the symbiology in the film as well. But nevertheless, I think that the whole arc of the film and the way that it came together was really well done. And you know, obviously the CGI, or what was CGI then, could have been a lot better. I think that it was, who was it? I think it was Brian the Blessed, you know, the Prince Voltan guy. I think he came out and he said that they had 2,000 people hanging on ropes, like puppeteers, to get the exact, shot of them coming in to save the day, as the birds that they are. And also the set of the film and the set design was also quite phenomenal as well. But yeah, I found it a very good film and a very well constructed film, nevertheless.
Yeah, you have to be aware about Brian Blessed. He exaggerates quite a lot in his stories.
Yeah. I heard as much as well.
Yeah, I think it'll be nearer sort of 200 than 2,000. But
Probably. It's probably 20, actually.
Yeah,
Probably 2.
It's like the story where he was at the North Pole and he punched a polar bear where that came into his tent.
Well. Come on, that's highly contested. Come on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he's a bit of a romancer, as we say in the north of England. He comes from near where I do, anyway. So you know, he's sort of. I can see Brian Blessed, and I can see his sense of humour and his tongue-in-cheek sort of. It's probably why I've also got this booming voice and everything. As I say, he comes from the same neck of the woods as me, so.
Yeah.
And,
but
yeah.
nevertheless, the set design is absolutely crazy, right? They did such a good job.
Yeah, they did a good job for the time. Don't forget, if you look at the original Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, where Luke is riding that creature across the ice and everything, that does not look good today. I think George Lucas has tweaked with it, but if you see the original, it doesn't look that great. The effects are very much of their time. There's no CGI in this. CGI is very, very, very much in its infancy, and I don't know which is the first that used CGI, but I know that Tron's a couple of years later, and it's very basic. When I say very basic, it looks fantastic. It certainly blew my socks off when I was a kid. But
yeah, no, that was just for lack of a better word. But still, what they did with the film, the landscapes and the way that they created that space feeling at such a early age, really, in cinematography, where they created this outer world and the lasers and the beams and flying things and in air and in oxygen and stuff like that when they're flying around without spaceship suits on and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely not the CGI aspect. That was like maybe a bit of a slip of the tongue, but still, I feel like Flash Gordon, bro, that's ahead of its time. You know, imagine watching Flash Gordon right now. That would be crazy.
Yeah, I think what gives it a sort of an air of authenticity is the aesthetics of it. It very much makes use of Art Deco aesthetics. If you've got aesthetics in a film, it becomes more believable than if you don't have, I think. And you can get away with stuff. I really believe, you really sort of believe that you're somewhere else. Because it's got things that you can relate to, but yet it's otherworldly at the same time. The swirling atmosphere and so on was created with simple ink, ink in water. So something as simple as that. Often you get the best effects through the most simple means. John Carpenter is a great proponent of that. But yeah, I mean, this was created by a team of Italians headed by Danilo Donati, who was given license to do what he wanted, basically. And so the whole costumery and, and sets and everything, look fantastic, to be quite honest. It looks very rich. Well, if you're in an emperor's palace, it would look like that. So, and equally, the forest scenes on Arborea, that looks very good, and so on. It's and to come sorry, I just finished by saying that I'm trying to remember the producer's name at the moment, Dino De Laurentiis. Of course, he produces Dune a couple of years later, where they reuse a lot of those Art Deco aesthetics.
Yeah, far out. I got to go look into this Luento's guy, because Dune has also come out in recent years. I think it was this year when it came out with the sequel to the first one as well. So it's interesting as well. I should probably read that book, because there's a lot of things there as well. Maybe perhaps as well a bit more of the predictive programming. But, if I was watching this Flash Gordon in the 1980s, I certainly wouldn't have been upset with the way that it's created. I probably would have thought that, watching it as a kid in 1980, it's probably far beyond its time, maybe in certain ways. What do you think?
Far beyond its time. I don't know. I think it's very much of its time. As I say, I think that it's an improved version of Barbarella in many ways. Barbarella was, 68, I think. So this is 12 years later. And I think that they've made big improvements on that. But it certainly has that feel to it. And as I say, same producer again. So, is it ahead of its time? Well, in some ways, I suppose you can look at a film like Masters of the Universe that came out in, 86, I think, so 6 years later. And I think that the effects hold up better than that, certainly. The same with the fourth installment of Superman. And even then, of course, Brian Blessed mentioned something which was interesting when he talked about, well, Superman, they only had an effect for one man flying. How difficult do you think it is for, he said 2,000, but, as I say, more 200 men.
It's 2,000, David. Let's leave it at that.
So, yeah.
Let's take his word for it.
Yeah. Let's go for 6 million. It's always that figure, isn't it?
6 million, that's fine. Let's blow it out of proportion here. 8 million.
Speaking of 6 million, one thing I noticed as well on that erasing brain scene, and that's when they mentioned the god Daizan. Did you notice that?
I did, but I wasn't sure what to make of it.
Die at the beginning there, and of course the last part is Nazi spelled backwards.
Oh, well, nothing to worry about. It's all fine. No, actually, I didn't notice that. I just was so captivated by that cutscene in the Doctor's memory. I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah, as I said, there are lots of sort of propagandist bits in there. The usual staple as well you have at the beginning, where you have the Negro killed, The Negro prince is killed by Ming. So,
Yeah, it's like, fall on your own sword and show me your loyalty. And the guy does it, but then he rebels and he tries to kill Ming, and he's like, no, and he cuts him into space, and he's like, no, and takes his sword from him and then kills him. It was weird as well because I was kind of like, what are these people doing here? But it was nice that the Negroes represented their own minority and were Negroes themselves, unlike when you have these new reiterations of films, when you have the Rings of Power, the television series, and it's coming out, it's like everybody's black, white, brown, and fucking whatever color of the sun. But, it's nice to see that at least Flash Gordon understood that, there's intrinsic minorities as well, but yeah, it's, I didn't really look into how maybe a Negro was sacrificed by Ming, but I can kind of see it now, I guess.
yeah, well, I made a comparison. I thought it was a very similar scene to, if you've seen Spartacus, where there's a Negro killed at the beginning by the Emperor as well. When Spartacus faces this Negro in the arena, when he's a gladiator, and instead of killing Spartacus because he gets the upper hand, throws the spear at the Emperor instead, and of course he's killed for it. And I thought that is very much a parallel scene.
Yeah. Would that have been just an intertextual reference?
I think it is, yeah. I think it is. But equally, Spartacus is a very Zionist film. It was created very much because Kirk Douglas was a fervent Zionist. And so, it had that in it. Does that tie in with the themes that we've seen in Flash Gordon? Maybe. But one thing...
Maybe they do. And also Spartacus was also the figure that emancipated a lot of slaves at the time when he was alive. And I remember reading something, I don't have the exact reference, but Spartacus is actually seen as this archetypal figure in Judaism because of his emancipation of slaves and how they correlate that with Jews being liberated as well. So that's interesting. We might have to do the next episode might just have to be about Spartacus.
Yeah, that would be interesting, actually. It would be very interesting to hear your views on Spartacus, because, as I say, there's a lot of it's a very interesting film, which started off as Kubrick's endeavour, but it became very much Kirk Douglas's endeavour.
Kubrick is a very interesting fellow as well.
Yes, well, we've done Eyes Wide Shut on Mjolnir, the movies, and we've done The Shining as well. So we've done a couple of Kubricks, and I dare say we'll be doing more. Yeah,
because Kubrick he has certain things with the Kabbalah as well, which is a very interesting method of esoteric thought. But I'd have to refresh myself with research in regards to Kubrick, but yeah, his films definitely did make an impact.
Yeah. But one thing, coming back to Flash Gordon, I noticed is that, all the blacks are sort of together. They have their own world and they have their own space. There's never a sort of a danger of them integrating or anything like that. They're very much separate, as are all the different peoples. But they unite together as separate peoples to thwart Ming. So, if you can sort of see Ming as, I don't know, Klaus Schwab or Soros or one of these people.
Yeah.
It has a good message to it in many ways for people.
Yeah, especially when you've got that Freemason symbol and you're kind of like, well, who created the Freemasons and what's the point of the Freemasons, right? You can get into that as well. But that's the difference of the films that we have now in 1980 in comparison to 2020, where we have this. these intrinsic demographics coming against a common enemy, but now we have this mixed, multicultural, intrinsic ideology of let's all fight together, black, yellow, and brown, against this common enemy, and the common enemy is always a white man, obviously. But it's funny how that's changed as well, and especially through film as well. That's why it's always good to analyse these films.
Well, with most of the films back then, the one thing that you notice is that they're very much ethnically European dominated, albeit with a very Jewish subtext a lot of the time. But there's the difference with wokeness is that they're very much multiracial. It's all about miscegenation. It's all very much anti-white and so on. So there's nothing that, for people like us, there's nothing that you can really enjoy. And then, of course, when you don't enjoy it and you don't go to the cinema, you don't watch these films, then they blame the audience and say, oh, no, it's not us that's at fault, it's you. You're the problem. So,
reverse psychology 101. Fucking hell.
Yeah, because the thing about these films, from back then is they gave a little bit to the audience. Okay, you've got to ingest this bit of propaganda, but equally we'll give you a bit of something that you like at the same time. So it's a bit of give and take. Whereas now it's all take. You can't watch them. They're unwatchable to me. I haven't watched a new film in ages. I mean, Coy wants me to watch, and I started watching it, the new Dune films, and it's very difficult for me to engage with them, I'll be honest.
Yeah, no, I can't either. I can't watch anything on Netflix or anything else. I recently watched Downton Abbey, and that's about it. Like, I really can't do well with anything that's coming out these days. Definitely not.
Yeah, Downton Abbey was good, but then again they had this little plot with one of the female aristocrats and a black musician. So even stuff like that, they take things from you. They stop you enjoying what should be an enjoyable experience, because that's what entertainment should be. It should be an enjoyable experience, but they're making it unenjoyable. One thing, I suppose we're nearing the end of this podcast now, and so I thought we'd end by looking at the beginning of the film. Because in the beginning of the film, you have manipulation of the weather, Ming's manipulation of the weather, which at the time would have been, it would have been seen as something like one of these Looney Tunes inventions by Acme or something. But now, well, what do you think?
Oh, well, you definitely have the chemtrails that you see every day of the fucking week, right? And all of these different things. You have the hurricane and the weather that just hit the USA. It's obviously orchestrated to a certain extent, and to see it reflected in the film and its opening, that's why I see it's like, whoa, it's predictive programming in a way as well, to get us kind of thinking about these things. But yeah, that was interesting how they have earthquake and all these different disasters that they can hit Earth with from their palace in the third world up in space. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting that the global elites, they're saying on one hand, ridiculous conspiracy theorists, you can't manipulate the weather. And then in the other hand, they're saying, oh, you've got to believe in man-made climate change. Well, hang on, you're just talking about manipulating the weather there. It's...
Yep. How do you want your batteries? How do you want your lithium, right? Fucking hell.
Yeah, so yeah, the weather is being manipulated, and that's a fact. Cloud seeding is a thing. And the technology is quite old for it, actually. So we're looking at technology that's being ever refined just as things like AI and so on are being ever refined. AI exists, people. I did a video on AI. It was quite some time ago now. It was about 8 or 9 years ago or something. And people wrote in immediately. Well, AI. You're not. It's stupid to believe all that. That machines control us and everything. And yet then, a couple of years later, you had basically Facebook's bots automatically banning people and so on. What I said was perfectly true, and
no, it is 100%. You say the correct words and you're fed automatically into the algorithm. I myself, I've been shadow banned. Like, I'm not even on Earth the way that I've been shadow banned, and I haven't even really said that much. So, yeah, all those bots, AI, it's a crazy world that we live in. It's science fiction, right?
That's right. In 1980 it was science fiction, but it's amazing how often science fiction in one decade turns out to be science fact in the next. And
exactly.
So yeah, I suppose we'll end with the music, because the music often makes a film, and I think that certainly Queen did an excellent job. It wasn't just Queen; they had a couple of composers in as well, but mainly it was Queen. Don't know. Are you a fan of the music? Do you think that it adds to the whole experience?
Personally, I got a bit annoyed at the whole flash, and then flash, I got a bit annoyed, but yeah, it's worthy of the film, especially done by Queen. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better composer, really.
I think that it suits the film extremely well because Queen themselves are so camp. So, so that's the reason I think that it goes well. They sort of knew basically what was required because they were what was required.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that sort of bohemian aspect to a certain degree, definitely. I mean, it was a great film. I really don't have any complaints. I thought it was great for the time, and I really enjoyed it as my introduction to sci-fi. I mean, I really can't complain.
Yeah, and so we shall, I think, leave it on that positive note. And it is, for those people who have never seen it before, a really good film. And one that comes up and is referenced, was referenced by the film Ted, and Ted 2, of course, Sam Jones making guest appearances in those films. I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of those films, but it's amazing how much it was in the consciousness of Gen Xers like me. And certainly it obviously appeals to, I don't know, are you Gen Z, Mimi?
Yeah, Gen Z. Gen Z.
So it might be making a comeback then. and
hopefully. I mean, it's great. I can only do my best and recommend it. It's excellent.
And who knows, it might get Gen Zers into filmmaking and them start making films that are more amenable to people like us. That would be a good thing. And so...
Definitely.
And I think we'll leave it on that thought. Thanks to you, and we'll see you next time. I hope that people will discuss this in the comments section, and remember to subscribe and follow both to Mimi1421 as she is on Twitter, and myself, I'm David Yorkshire. Goodbye for now. Goodbye, Mimi.
Adios.